When we read the Bible, we learn about many different places and people from long ago. One of these important places is the country we know today as Iran. In the Bible, this land was not called Iran. It was known by other names like Persia, Media, and Elam. These names tell the story of different groups of people who lived there. The story of Iran in the Bible begins very early, right after the Great Flood in the time of Noah. Noah had 3 sons, and their families spread out to fill the earth. 2 of his grandsons are very important for this story. One was named Elam, and his family settled in the warm southwestern part of Iran. The other was named Madai, and his family, the Medes, lived in the high, cool mountains in the north. The Elamites and the Medes were 2 of the first groups of people mentioned in the Bible who lived in the area of modern-day Iran. The Elamites were descendants of Shem, one of Noah's sons, and they built a powerful kingdom. Their land was rich and they had strong kings who were known for their skill in war. The Medes were descendants of Japheth, another of Noah's sons. They were a hardy people who lived in the Zagros Mountains. For a long time they were separate tribes, but later they would unite to become a mighty nation. Understanding these 2 groups helps us see how God's plan for this region began to unfold, starting with these ancient families. These lands of Elam and Media were at the center of many great events in the Bible. They were neighbors to other big empires like Babylon and Assyria. Sometimes they were friends and other times they were enemies. The Bible tells us that God was watching over all these nations, not just the people of Israel. He had a special purpose for the people of Persia, Media, and Elam. Their story is woven into the larger story of God's love and his plan to save the world. From a war in the time of Abraham to the birth of Jesus, and even into prophecies about the future, the land of Iran plays a surprising and significant part. As we journey through the Bible, we will meet kings and queens from Persia, hear prophecies about their empire, and see how they helped God's people in times of great need. We will learn how a brave young woman named Esther saved her people in the heart of the Persian Empire. We will also see how wise men, who likely came from this very region, were the first people from another nation to come and worship the newborn King Jesus. The story is full of adventure, danger, and hope, showing that God's love reaches every corner of the earth, including the ancient lands of Iran. The very first time we see someone from the land of Iran in the Bible, it is in a story about a big war. This story is found in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. At that time, a powerful king named Chedorlaomer ruled over the land of Elam. He was so strong that he had made several other kings in the land of Canaan his servants. For 12 years these kings paid him tribute, which is like a tax, to show he was their master. But in the 13th year, they decided to rebel and refused to serve him any longer. Chedorlaomer was very angry and decided to punish them for their disobedience. King Chedorlaomer did not go to war alone. He gathered his friends, 3 other kings from the east, to form a mighty army. Together they marched all the way to Canaan to fight the 5 kings who had rebelled. The battle was fierce, and the army from the east was victorious. They defeated the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and took all their food and possessions. They also took many people as prisoners. One of the people they captured was a man named Lot. Lot was the nephew of a very important man named Abraham, who was a faithful follower of God. Lot and his family were taken away from their home in Sodom. When Abraham heard the terrible news that his nephew Lot had been captured, he did not hesitate. Even though the army of Chedorlaomer was powerful, Abraham trusted God to help him. He gathered all the trained men in his household, 318 of them, and set off to rescue his nephew. He chased the eastern kings all the way to the north of Canaan. Abraham was clever. He divided his small group of men and attacked the enemy camp at night. The surprise attack worked. Chedorlaomer's army was confused and frightened, and they ran away. Abraham and his men chased them and brought back everyone who had been taken. This story is important because it is the first conflict in the Bible between a power from the east and God's chosen people. Abraham, a man of faith, was able to defeat a strong coalition led by the king of Elam. He rescued Lot and all the other prisoners, showing that God's power is greater than any army. This event in Genesis sets the stage for many more interactions between the people of Israel and the people from the land of Iran. It was a dramatic first meeting, but it would not be the last. God's plan for the people of this region was only just beginning to be revealed. Many years after the time of Abraham, the people of Israel had become a great nation, but they had turned away from God. As a punishment, God allowed a powerful and cruel empire, Babylon, to conquer them. The Babylonian army, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, destroyed the beautiful city of Jerusalem and its holy temple. They took most of the Jewish people away from their homes and forced them to live as exiles in Babylon. This was a very sad time for God's people. They had lost their land, their city, and their temple. It seemed like all hope was gone, and they wondered if they would ever be able to return home. But even in this dark time, God gave his people a message of hope. He spoke through his prophets, who were special messengers. Two of these prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah, delivered an amazing prophecy. They said that God was going to use other nations to punish the proud and wicked empire of Babylon. And which nations would God use? The prophets specifically named the Medes and the people of Elam, who were part of the rising Persian power. Jeremiah wrote that God would stir up the spirit of the kings of the Medes because his purpose was to destroy Babylon. This was a surprising message for the Jewish exiles to hear. The prophets described how these warriors from the east would come and conquer the mighty city of Babylon. Isaiah called them a holy army that God was gathering for his purpose. He said they would show no mercy to the Babylonians who had been so cruel to Israel. Jeremiah spoke of a powerful bow of Elam, which was famous for its skilled archers, and how God would use their strength to bring judgment. This prophecy must have seemed impossible to the people living in exile. Babylon was the strongest empire in the world at that time. How could anyone defeat it? But the prophecy was a promise that God was still in control. This promise gave the Jewish people hope for the future. It showed them that God had not forgotten them, even though they were far from home. He was already preparing a way for them to be set free. God's plan was to use the Medes and the Persians, people from the land of modern-day Iran, as his special instruments. They would be the ones to open the doors of the prison and let his people go free. This was a powerful lesson that God can use anyone, even kings and armies from other nations, to accomplish his good and perfect will. The stage was set for a new empire to rise and change the world. The prophecies about the fall of Babylon came true in a spectacular way, all because of one of the most famous kings in history, Cyrus the Great. What is truly amazing is that the prophet Isaiah wrote about him by name more than 150 years before he was even born. Isaiah wrote down the exact words God told him. "This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him." It was incredible that God named this future king long before his time. God even called Cyrus my shepherd because he would be the one to care for God's people and lead them back to their home. Cyrus was the king of Persia. He was a brilliant leader and a skilled general. He united the Medes and the Persians into one powerful empire, the Medo-Persian Empire. Just as the prophets had foretold, Cyrus marched his army toward the great city of Babylon. The city was protected by massive walls and the wide Euphrates River, and the Babylonians felt completely safe. On the night of the attack, the Babylonian king, Belshazzar, was having a huge party, feeling sure that no one could ever conquer his city. But Cyrus had a clever plan. He had his soldiers dig channels to divert the water of the Euphrates River. With the river level suddenly much lower, Cyrus's army was able to walk right under the city walls through the dry riverbed. They took the city without a major battle, just as the prophecies had suggested. That very night, King Belshazzar was killed, and the mighty Babylonian Empire fell to the Medes and the Persians. The Jewish people who were living in Babylon as exiles saw this happen and knew that God's word was true. The man Isaiah had written about so long ago had finally arrived. Cyrus the Great was now their ruler, and they waited to see what he would do next. In the first year of his reign over Babylon, Cyrus did something that shocked the world. He issued a special decree, a royal order, for all the Jewish people. He declared that they were free to return to their homeland, Judah, and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. He even gave them back the gold and silver treasures that King Nebuchadnezzar had stolen from the first temple. Cyrus said that the Lord, the God of heaven, had given him all the kingdoms of the earth, and had appointed him to build a temple for him in Jerusalem. This pagan king from Persia became the protector and helper of God's people, fulfilling a prophecy and changing their lives forever. During the time of the Babylonian and Persian empires, there was a wise and faithful Jewish man named Daniel. God gave Daniel special abilities to understand dreams and visions about the future. One of the most famous dreams Daniel interpreted was one that the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar had. The king dreamed of a giant statue made of different metals. Daniel explained that the head of gold was Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian empire, but after him, another kingdom would rise represented by the statue's chest and arms of silver. Daniel said this silver kingdom would be inferior or less glorious than the gold one. This was the Medo-Persian Empire. The statue's two arms of silver were a perfect picture of this new empire. It was made of two parts, the Medes and the Persians. At first, they were partners, but soon the Persian part became much stronger than the Median part, just as one arm might be stronger than the other. This vision showed that the rise of the Medo-Persian Empire was not an accident. It was part of God's plan for history. Each kingdom would have its time to rule, and then another would take its place. This dream gave King Nebuchadnezzar and later the world a roadmap of the great empires that were to come, all under God's sovereign control. Later, Daniel had his own vision from God. He saw 4 giant beasts coming out of the sea. The second beast was like a bear. Daniel noticed something unusual about this bear. It was raised up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. The angel explaining the vision told him this bear represented the Medo-Persian Empire. The fact that it was raised on one side showed that one part of the empire, Persia, would become more powerful and dominant than the other part, Media. The 3 ribs in its mouth represented the 3 major conquests the empire would make to become so powerful, the kingdoms of Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. Daniel had another vision that made the identity of this empire even clearer. This time he saw a ram with 2 horns standing by a river. The horns were long, but one horn grew up later and was taller than the other. An angel appeared and told Daniel plainly, "The ram that you saw with the 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia." Once again the 2 horns represented the 2 peoples, and the taller horn that came up last symbolized the greater power of Persia, which rose to prominence after Media. These amazing visions given to Daniel showed a detailed picture of the Medo-Persian Empire, confirming its place in God's timeline and its role in history. One of the most exciting stories in the entire Bible takes place in the heart of the Persian Empire, in its capital city of Susa. The king at this time was named Ahasuerus, who is also known in history as Xerxes. He ruled over a vast empire that stretched from India to Ethiopia. In this story, the Persian Empire becomes the setting for a great test of faith and courage. A young Jewish woman named Esther was chosen to be the new queen because of her great beauty, but no one in the palace, not even the king, knew that she was Jewish. Her older cousin Mordecai, who had raised her, told her to keep it a secret. Trouble began with a wicked and powerful man named Haman. He was the king's highest official, and the king had ordered everyone to bow down to him. But Mordecai, being a faithful Jew, would only bow to God, so he refused to bow to Haman. This filled Haman with rage. When he found out that Mordecai was a Jew, he decided he would not just punish Mordecai. Instead, he made a terrible plan to destroy every single Jewish person living anywhere in the huge Persian Empire. He tricked the king into signing a decree that on a certain day, all Jews, men, women, and children, were to be killed. When Mordecai heard about this evil law, he was heartbroken. He sent a message to Queen Esther, telling her that she had to do something to save her people. He told her, "Perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this." Esther was terrified. It was against the law to go to the king without being called, and the punishment was death. But she knew she had to be brave. She asked all the Jews in the city to fast and pray for her for 3 days. Then, putting her life in God's hands, she went to see the king. The king was pleased to see her, and held out his golden scepter, which meant she was safe. Esther cleverly invited the king and Haman to 2 special banquets. At the second banquet, she finally revealed her secret. She told the king that she was a Jew, and that the wicked Haman had plotted to destroy her and all her people. The king was furious with Haman. He ordered that Haman be executed on the very gallows that Haman had built to hang Mordecai. Because a Persian law could not be changed, the king issued a new decree. This new law gave the Jewish people the right to defend themselves against their enemies. On the day they were supposed to be destroyed, the Jews were victorious. The story shows how God used a brave queen to protect his people right inside the Persian court. The story of Persia's connection to God's people does not end in the Old Testament. When we open the New Testament to the book of Matthew, we find a wonderful story about the birth of Jesus. It tells us that after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. These men are often called the Magi. They were a special class of priests and scholars from the part of the world that used to be the Medo-Persian Empire. which is modern-day Iran. They were famous for studying the stars and ancient writings. They were not Jewish, but they were seeking the newborn king of the Jews. These magi had seen a special new star in the sky. They believed this star was a sign that a great king had been born. Their knowledge likely came from the ancient Jewish prophecies that were kept in their land. Remember that the prophet Daniel had been a very high official in both the Babylonian and Persian courts centuries earlier. Daniel had written prophecies not just about empires, but also about the coming of the Messiah, God's chosen Savior. It is very possible that the Magi were students of Daniel's writings and knew that the time was near for the promised king to appear. The star was the final sign that led them on their long journey. When the Magi arrived in Jerusalem, they asked King Herod, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." This question troubled the evil King Herod, but the Magi were filled with joy and expectation. The star they had seen in the east went ahead of them, until it stopped over the very place where the child Jesus was. When they saw the house, they were overjoyed. They went inside and saw the young child with his mother Mary. They bowed down and worshipped him, offering him precious and symbolic gifts. The gifts they brought were fit for a king and a god. They gave Jesus gold, which is a gift for a king. They gave him frankincense, which is a type of incense used in worshiping God. And they gave him myrrh, a special perfume that was often used to prepare a body for burial, which pointed to the sacrifice Jesus would one day make. These wise men from the east, from the land of Persia, were the very first non-Jews or Gentiles to recognize and worship Jesus as the Messiah. Their journey shows that the good news of Jesus' birth was for all people from every nation on earth. The Bible tells us about things that happened long ago, but it also contains prophecies about events that are still in the future. In the Old Testament book of Ezekiel, there is a very important prophecy about a great war that will happen in the latter days, or the end times. This prophecy describes a huge group of nations that will join together to attack the nation of Israel after it has been gathered back to its land and is living in peace. The leader of this attack is a mysterious figure called Gog of the land of Magog, who some people believe represents a power from the north of Israel, perhaps modern Russia. What is very interesting for our story is the list of nations that will join Gog in this invasion. The prophet Ezekiel names them very clearly, and one of the very first countries he mentions is Persia. He writes, "Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them." Cush and Put are ancient names for lands in Africa, likely Sudan and Libya. But Persia is clearly the land we know today as Iran. This prophecy says that in the future, Iran will be part of a military alliance, a group of nations working together, that comes against the people of Israel. This is a very different role from the one Persia played in the days of Cyrus and Esther. The prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 38 says that this great army will come like a storm, covering the land like a cloud. Their goal will be to capture treasure and destroy the people of Israel. It will look like Israel has no hope and is about to be completely defeated by this overwhelming force. The nations of the world will watch in fear as this massive invasion takes place. For the people of Israel, it will be a time of great trouble and danger, as enemies surround them on all sides. It will seem as if history is repeating the sad times of the past when foreign armies came to destroy them. But the prophecy does not end with Israel's defeat. In fact, it says the exact opposite will happen. God declares that he will step in to save his people in a very dramatic way. He will fight against Gog and his allied armies, including the forces from Persia. The Bible says God will send a great earthquake, and there will be disease, fire, and burning sulfur raining down from the sky. The invading armies will be completely destroyed. God says he will do this so that all the nations of the world will know that he is the Lord. So, while Persia is prophesied to be an enemy of Israel in the last days, the story also shows that their invasion is doomed to fail because of God's direct intervention. The Bible's story of Iran is complex. We see it as a protector of God's people under King Cyrus, and as a future enemy in the war of Gog and Magog. It might seem like the story ends with judgment and destruction for the nation of Persia, but the Bible often gives a message of hope even after a message of judgment. God's ultimate desire is not to destroy but to restore, and we find a special promise of restoration for a key part of ancient Persia. The prophet Jeremiah, who prophesied the fall of Babylon, also gave a specific prophecy about the fate of Elam, the ancient heartland of southwestern Iran. Jeremiah delivered a message of judgment against Elam first. He said that God would bring disaster upon them and shatter the bow of Elam, which was the symbol of their military strength. He prophesied that their people would be scattered to all the nations of the earth. This part of the prophecy came true in ancient times when Elam was conquered and absorbed into other empires. It is a serious warning about the consequences of turning away from God or fighting against His purposes. It shows that God is a just God who holds all nations accountable for their actions, including the powerful nation of Elam. But the prophecy does not stop there. After the words of judgment, God adds a beautiful promise of hope. At the very end of the chapter, Jeremiah writes these amazing words from God. "Yet I will restore the fortunes of Elam in the latter days, declares the Lord." This is a powerful promise. It means that despite the judgment and scattering, God has not forgotten the people of Elam. He has a future plan to bring them back and bless them. The phrase "in the latter days" connects this promise to the same end times period as the prophecy of Ezekiel. It suggests that Iran's story does not end with the failed invasion of Israel. This promise of restoration for Elam gives us a final, hopeful picture of Iran's biblical destiny. It shows that God's heart is for the people of Iran, just as it is for all people. While the government of Persia in the end times may join an alliance against Israel and face judgment, God will still save a remnant of its people. The Bible's story for Iran starts in Genesis and goes all the way to the end times, showing a journey from conflict to protection and from future judgment to ultimate hope. It reminds us that God's plan of redemption is big enough to include people from every tribe, tongue, and nation, including the ancient and historic land of Iran. If you enjoyed this journey through Iran's biblical destiny, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more fascinating explorations. Thanks for watching.